Hi, this is going to be a series of recordings on spiritual gifts. Now, there are a lot of views on spiritual gifts, so I want to provide a consolidated study on spiritual gifts, focusing on a particular text and then moving on to another text. Generally, in this area, people have their pet verses that they quote, and sometimes it's good to bring them all together before we um, drive home a point. And also, when we read a text, we need to see what that, rather than reading into the text, we want the text to read to us. Okay, so that's my endeavor as we begin the series, and we will start with 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and then go to 13, 14, and then take some text from the book of Acts. Okay, so let's begin with 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and I'm going to read the first 6 verses, and then we will see what the text speaks to us. Okay, so let me read verse 1. Now, about the gifts of the Spirit, brothers and sisters, I do not want you to be uninformed. So the fact statement is the fact that Paul wants the church to be rightly informed. And we can assume that by and large the church is generally uninformed, as was the church at Corinth. Verse 2. You know that when you were pagans, somehow or other, you were influenced and led astray to mute idols. So the fact is that this church, the believers had a past wherein they were influenced by mute idols, and just like them, we too were astray at one point in time. And so what can we assume? Unlike these mute idols, when we come to the living God, we can expect Him to speak to us. Okay? Verse 3. Therefore, I want you to know that no one who is speaking by the Spirit of God says, Jesus be cursed, and no one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit. So the fact statement here is that the Holy Spirit brings about an overwhelming sense of the Lordship of Jesus. And what one can assume is that it is the ministry of the Holy Spirit to reveal the person of Christ. Okay, verse 4 to 6. There are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in every one, it is the same God at work. So here we see that there is a unity among the Godhead, although they speak about diverse spiritual gifts, the services around these gifts, and also how it functions. So this was what we can gather from the first 6 verses. So let's go into the next section, the next 4 verses, that is 1 Corinthians 12, 7 to 11. Verse 7 reads, Now to each one the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. So we know as a fact that the manifestation of the Spirit or the working of the Spirit is for the common good of all believers. It is not limited to one particular person. Verses 8 to 10, to one there is given through the Spirit a message of wisdom, to another a message of knowledge by means of the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healing by that one Spirit, to another miraculous powers, to another prophecy, to another distinguishing between spirits, to another speaking in different kinds of tongues, and to still another the interpretation of tongues. So what do we find from these 3 verses? We know that every believer is given a specific gift or gifts, and it is not the same as a fellow believer. He may get the gift of tongues, and I may get the gift of prophecy. or I may get the gift of distinguishing between spirits, and someone else may get the gift of faith. So what is implied is that every believer must identify his or her God-given gift or gifts. Okay, coming to verse 11. All these are the work of one and the same Spirit, and He distributes them to each one just as He determines. Now, what is implied here is that it's God who is in the distribution of these gifts. It's not you and I who pick and choose what we want. Okay, so that was a brief study on the first 11 verses of chapter 12 of 1 Corinthians, and we'll come back for more. Thank you.